Double Dragon, Double Dragon, Double Dragon. What an influential and iconic series. Few games were quite as genre-defining as that of this series, resulting in tons more beat-em-ups that would be inspired by these early co-op brawlers. As great as this genre is though, sadly its thunder would eventually be stolen in arcades by one-on-one versus fighting games, with later 3D polygonal titles becoming popular at home. These changes in consumer tastes would, for a good while at least, spell the end of the belt scroller. However, sometimes, even when it is darkest, there is light, and in this instance, baby blue and bright pink neon lights. That's right, in an era whereby the beat-em-up was all but dead, the nostalgically designed, bold, vibrant and eclectic Double Dragon Neon burst onto the scene. But as fondly as most people now look back at this game today, not everyone was happy with this release at the time, resulting in some of the most polarising opinions being posted about a game in recent memory. So with all of this said, hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. This is the amazing Double Dragon Neon and why it caused outrage. Yeah. The Double Dragon series is vast. Yoshihisa Kishimoto's first two Double Dragon games are considered all-time classics that would inspire a generation, but sadly things would only begin to go a bit pear-shaped from there. Unfortunately, the development house that owned the franchise would use and abuse the brand's established success, taking advantage of Double Dragon's name value. In a disgusting twist, game production was outsourced to inexperienced third parties, and in many cases the Double Dragon license would seemingly become available to be used by anyone, providing they were willing to pay for it, of course. This would result in many dreadful games, a terrible TV show, and an even worse Hollywood movie. While Double Dragon's legacy was being tarnished, there were still bright sparks here and there, such as the rushed and incomplete Super Double Dragon created in-house at Technos, which featured great mechanics. Created with Maneki Ebenuba at the development helm, a previous superfan of the franchise, he would not be enough to save Technos, who would end up filing for bankruptcy in 1996. With Technos gone, a licensing company named Million Company Limited was formed to purchase some of their intellectual properties, which would include Double Dragon. In 2003, Million would utilise this by developing Double Dragon Advance, a project led by the respected Maneki Ebenuma, who would produce a game that many argue was the greatest Double Dragon yet. In 2005, Million Company Limited would become a subsidiary of another company, but it would be WayForward Technologies who would develop the next big entry from the famous franchise. WayForward are a California-based independent developer and publisher. While the company had existed since 1990, mainly producing educational software, fast forward to 2002, they had successfully built up a great reputation developing a game based around their own intellectual property, called Shantae, a title which we all know would receive all sorts of critical acclaim. In fact, many tend to consider it the most technically impressive game that was ever released for the Game Boy Color. Going forward, way forward in fact, the company would continue to develop dozens of games for Nintendo handhelds. By the time we got to Double Dragon Neon in 2012, the company was a well-established and trusted development entity. Now when it comes to American-produced Double Dragon games and media, to put it politely, these didn't have the greatest of reputations. Projects like Double Dragon 5, for example, deserved killing with fire. WayForward Technologies would be careful not to repeat the same mistakes of the past. So in an attempt to mitigate future issues, they brought in original series creator Yoshihisa Kishimoto himself to the project as a consultant. If they wanted to try and partially capture the spirit of the classics, what better way to do it than that? Throughout development, he would regularly provide feedback on character design and gameplay elements. With regards to all of this, Kishimoto describes Neon as a very Western adaptation of Double Dragon, with certain mechanics taken from previous games and still a title with a mood and feel that reminded him of the original arcade game. Like in the original, with this game players could control martial artists Billy and Jimmy as they fight their way through hordes of enemies from the Shadow Warriors gang, trying to rescue Marion. But substantial changes have been made to give this game a fresh and more modern feel. For starters, this was the first Double Dragon game in history that featured 3D graphics rendered with polygon-based models. The game, released on the Xbox 360 and PS3, would also feature a new main villain and leader of the Shadow Warriors gang, known as Skullmageddon, who perhaps has more depth and a higher presence than any previous Double Dragon villains. I promise you more on this skelly gentleman soon, as in my opinion at least, I think he is one of the highlights of the game. This now cult classic, released to coincide with the 25th anniversary of the franchise, would feature dialogue and a graphical style that was heavily inspired by the 1980s. So while the game was new, it presented many elements that attempted to make gamers feel nostalgic about a certain era and certain aesthetics. This makes a lot of sense, particularly when we take into account that this game came out years before Streets of Rage 4 and Shredder's Revenge, and the genre wasn't en vogue again quite yet. This is emphasised even further with the soundtrack for the game, pairing remixes of classic Double Dragon tunes with a mix of 80s pop music sounding anthems. The music in the game, composed by Jake Kaufman, does a good job of adding to the overall feel of the game. In fact, the music is fantastic and suits the atmosphere and tempo of the game to perfection, translating into an unforgettable beat-em-up experience. At its heart, the game plays like a standard arcade beat-em-up, featuring designated punch, kick, jump and run buttons. To build on this, an evade button was added for dodging attacks. Speaking of dodging, these functions are part of one of the key and unique mechanics of the game. If dodging is timed correctly by players, they will glow red, which, fitting in with the game's 80s theme, is known as gleaming, which allows players to parry attacks and perform more powerful moves. When I first picked up this game, I overlooked this feature at first, but mastering it is key to building up a fun and engaging tempo. The inclusion of this mechanic is excellent, and will likely give the game a different feel to anything you've played prior. Like in other beat-em-ups, items can be picked up off the floor to replenish health, but also money can be used in the game to buy items from the shop, and special mixtapes can be found too, which can be equipped to give players extra abilities that, when utilised, consume an extra energy meter. These tape powers can even be improved by visiting a tapesmith and paying him with the in-game currency, which is obtained from defeating bosses at the end of each stage. In terms of other new features, Billy and Jimmy can now perform a special high five technique, which has a number of functions, including allowing two co-op players to split their life meters and share them an equal amount, or psych up their teammates or instantly trigger Gleam. Further cooperative functionality comes into play too, due to players having unlimited time to revive a partner who has been KO'd before a life is deducted. Also, when one player has run out of lives, they can steal more from the other player if the other player still has 2 or more left. When experiencing Double Dragon Neon, old school players will be instantly greeted by nostalgic familiarity with a remix of the classic Double Dragon arcade game's Attract theme. The excitement kicks off in familiar territory with the unforgettable scene of Marion getting punched in the gut by a member of the Shadow Warriors gang, igniting a high-speed chase as the boys leap into action. As you brawl your way through the neon-soaked streets of the opening stage, you'll be pumped up by the return of the classic first stage theme from the original game. The action heats up as you receive basic instructions, ensuring you're ready to tackle the chaos that awaits. Here you face off against a variety of enemies, including plenty of dominatrixes to punch in the face, because, let's be honest, what kind of beat 'em up would it be without that? Now let's dive into my thoughts on the visual presentation of Double Dragon Neon. My feelings are a bit of a mixed bag. The music does a fantastic job of capturing that classic Double Dragon vibe, and the combat feels intuitive and satisfying. However, I'm torn on the game's graphics. The character models have a nostalgic PS2 era look, which feels a bit dated for a game released in 2012 and the wrong era of gaming to be getting nostalgic about with this one. While the character designs are kind of appealing, I can't help but think the game would have shined brighter if it embraced a fully 2D aesthetic, similar to later releases like the stunning Streets of Rage 4. But criticism aside, and credit where credit is due, the 2D backgrounds in Double Dragon Neon are absolutely fantastic, showcasing beautiful artistry and attention to detail. If the entire game had stuck to this 2D theme, in my opinion it could have achieved a more cohesive and polished visual style. Unfortunately, the 3D elements give off a bit of a mobile game vibe, which doesn't do justice to the game's true potential. It's a shame because Double Dragon Neon is so much more than that. With a strong visual direction, it could have stood out even stronger. While stylistically, again, a game that wasn't to everyone's taste, I adored the recently released Double Dragon Gaiden last year. Another one of the most solid Double Dragon games ever made. I can get you this game including all of the DLC for an astonishing low $9.87. Get huge discounts on thousands of titles and support my work simultaneously by using my link in the pinned comments. Happy shopping indeed. While on the subject of presentation, as already mentioned, the entire game is drenched in an over-the-top 80s aesthetic, embracing a cartoonish vibe that's as cliche as it gets, in the best way possible of course. It's like stepping into a time machine that takes you straight back to the era of neon lights and big hair, perfectly capturing the essence suggested by its title. In many ways it feels like playing a game version of the cult classic short film Kung Fury, which hilariously pokes fun at every 80s trope imaginable. Double Dragon Neon masterfully follows the same path, with art and humour that revels in the absurdity of the decade. The game is delightfully self-aware, acknowledging that Double Dragon was at its peak in the 80s, and leveraging that nostalgia in countless humorous and clever ways, which I am very much looking forward to telling you more about. When it comes to characters, Double Dragon Neon brings back some beloved classics, including the unforgettable villain, Abobo, making his triumphant return. However, the real fun kicks in when Billy and Jimmy blast off in a spaceship and come face to face with the game's main antagonist, Skullmageddon, for the very first time. I absolutely adore this over-the-top character, who has quickly become my favourite in the entire Double Dragon series. Imagine a villain that's a perfect blend of Skeletor and Shredder from the Turtles, and armed with an endless arsenal of bad puns and hilarious one-liners. Skullmageddon is everything you could want in a slapstick villain, and each of his appearances adds a new layer of humour to the game. One of the funniest moments, for example, happens in the third stage, where Skullmageddon continues his taunting through monitors. Players can hilariously punch these screens, causing him to panic and complain about the cost of the plasma monitors.
Williams, I'm docking your pay for this! I got the replacement plan! That's a plasma screen! It's expensive! What? They've already gotten this far? Watch me throw my hat! Surprise! Grabbed my rocket dojo, laid waste to my laboratory, broke my televisions, and murdered countless Williamses!
Every encounter with Skullmageddon is a delight, providing endless entertainment as the brothers punch and kick their way through their journey. His antics ensure that each stage is not just a brawl, but brawls with slapstick comedy moments reminiscent of Jesse and James showing up in Pokemon. Players will journey through a vibrant mix of city streets, outrageous outer space dojos, and even the serene Asian countryside. Each stage is a blast, offering a unique environment to explore and brawl in. One of the game's highlights occurs when you reach the genetic lab, where the classic beat-em-up action reaches new heights. Here you'll face off against two boss opponents trapped in giant test tubes. These monstrous foes burst through the glass, and the game hilariously introduces them as mistranslated mutants Bimmy and Jammy. This clever Easter egg is a nod to the infamous translation error from the NES version of Double Dragon 3, showing the developers' dedication to delighting long-term fans with the ultimate fan service. The fun doesn't stop there though. Oh, no. This stage also features a quintessential lift section, which, as any beat-em-up aficionado knows, is a must-have. Fighting your way through waves of enemies in a cramped elevator is pure concentrated nostalgia and a necessity for gracious living. Moments like these showcase the developers' love for the genre and their commitment to creating a game that's both a tribute to and an evolution of the classic Double Dragon experience we all know and love. Double Dragon Neon is packed with bizarre and delightful surprises not seen since the days, for better or worse, of Double Dragon 3. Imagine facing off against a strange, monstrous boss, then using its remains to slide down a slope. Well, you don't have to imagine this, you can do it in this game. This title embraces its weirdness in the best possible ways. While it's rich with callbacks to the classics, Double Dragon Neon boldly carves its own path, offering something both unique and entertaining in equal measures. Another standout stage is a creepy graveyard, where you'll battle zombies and all sorts of ghastly creatures. This isn't just a simple retelling of old adventures, it's a fresh, thrilling experience that keeps you on your toes. The blend of familiar elements and innovative twists makes Double Dragon Neon a wild, unpredictable ride of insanity from start to finish. For players who persevere with this one, prepare to be dazzled by Skullmageddon's palace. This lair is everything you'd expect from a Shadow Warrior gang leader's hideout, brought to life with a modern artistic flair with visually striking moments occurring such as battles fought entirely in silhouette, adding a stylish and cool touch to the gameplay. True to classic beat-em-up tradition, the lair is riddled with devious traps designed to take players out, providing yet another nostalgic nod to the games of old. The final showdown with Skullmageddon is both epic and amusing, especially with the introduction of the newly transformed Marion. In one of the most memorable beat-em-up scenes I've ever seen, Skullmageddon proudly unveils her as Evil Marion, setting the stage for a thrilling 2-on-2 battle. This climactic fight is long and challenging, testing your skills to the max. But victory is sweet as Skullmageddon flees to another realm in time and space, and Marion is restored to her original form. In a dazzling twist, Marion harnesses the power of love to help the brothers reach Skullmageddon, but not in their human forms. When they finally confront Skullmageddon, he reveals his absurd motive. All he ever wanted was a simple date. This sets the stage for one last epic battle, with the classic Double Dragon theme blaring triumphantly in the background, offering up one of the most cathartic final boss fights I've ever experienced in the genre. This showdown is intense, and after a grueling fight, one of the brothers lands the final blow, sending Mr. Mageddon tumbling off a cliff and falling through space as the end credits roll. But the fun doesn't end there. Skullmageddon delivers to us one final fantastic moment. An unforgettable performance singing about his defeat with a karaoke sing-along bar at the bottom of the screen. This amusing and epic send-off solidifies Skullmageddon as one of the most entertaining villains in gaming history. I think I am just going to have to show you a snippet of it to do this excellent justice.
Mind your face! I thought they could stop me. Thought I had the girl and she rocked my world. Tried to keep her away in my secret hiding place. Outer space. Things are fading to black.
Absolutely amazing. From his outlandish antics in the ridiculous continue screen to his memorable farewell song, Skullmageddon elevates the Neon experience to new heights. His slapstick, loony character makes every moment unforgettable and ensures that players are left with a smile long after the game ends. I don't think I'll ever forget laughing at him singing "Now here's a medal for your victory" as achievement unlocked flashes up on the screen. Skullmageddon is just so good. Now you might be wondering why, if I and so many others found so much fun and entertainment from this game, then how on earth is there any outrage in this story? Well, the answer to this question is simple. The existence of out-of-touch game journalists who would in some cases choose to completely bury this game due to it being too different from most of the video games that were trending at the time. At Double Dragon Neon's first release in 2012, it would receive mixed reviews, so let's begin digging into some of the praise and criticism from big publications at the time. Metro, with their great taste in this instance, would rightfully praise the game, loving its gaudy and over-the-top aesthetic. They would add that the masterful reboot of the granddaddy of scrolling beat-em-ups has real punch. It has just enough depth to keep the game interesting, while still maintaining the same great co-op action as the original. Interesting power-ups, fantastic soundtrack, and a great sense of humour. So far, so good. GameWatch.com would heap an even higher level of praise on this title, when one journalist summarised that Double Dragon Neon is evidence that my misplaced obsession with a classic coin-op wasn't misplaced after all. It's proof for those who weren't there or weren't even born, who believe themselves gaming experts because they remember when the first Deus Ex game came out, or Deus Ex for those who know. It's a return to gaming ancestry that confirms the retro gamer's assertion that it actually was better back then, and finally, gaming is good once again. As you can see, some critics were absolutely thrilled with Double Dragon Neon, praising it for its clever blend of old school charm and modern self-awareness. They loved how the game celebrated its nostalgic roots while also delivering a fresh and fun experience. The game's sharp sense of humour and playful nods to the past made it a standout, showcasing that it wasn't just about reliving the glory days, but also about having a blast while doing so, though sadly this seemed to completely go over the head of some game critics. While appealing to exactly the audience the game was supposed to, some website reviewers absolutely detested Double Dragon Neon. Spazio Games had some particularly harsh words, complaining that it wasn't enough like the originals. They would comment, "If you love the scrolling fighting game genre, grew up with Jimmy and Billy, and want to keep those wonderful memories pristine, then stay away from this game. The arcades were once temples of culture for every child, magical places to spend hours. Neon has very little in common with the original, both in atmosphere and gameplay. Even the bosses lack charisma and creativity, failing to present themselves effectively within the game's context. The spirit of Double Dragon in this episode is now only a distant memory. Ouch. For some, it seems Double Dragon Neon missed the mark entirely, transforming cherished memories into a distant, unrecognisable echo. These critics felt that the game strayed too far from the beloved originals, losing the magic and excitement that once defined the series. However, it wasn't this review that received a ton of backlash. Instead, it was the incredibly ignorant article put out there that was published by IGN. As you know what they say, you can't spell ignorant without IGN. IGN, one of the largest and most influential gaming news sites online, delivered an incredibly harsh verdict, awarding the game a mere 3.5 out of 10. Writer Mitch Dyer would upset a lot of people, but it wasn't necessarily for lambasting Double Dragon, but burying the entire beat-em-up genre and everything games like Final Fight and Turtles in Time brought to the table in a bewildering tirade. Dyer began by reminiscing. Remember when arcade beat-em-ups were deliberately too difficult so you'd pay to keep playing? How about when failure meant having to replay an entire level? It's a good thing those days are over, and it's too bad Double Dragon Neon doesn't realise it. Double Dragon Neon is the embodiment of what's wrong with HD remakes. It's afraid to let go of the 80s altar it worships at, even if it means cramming a crummy, archaic experience down players' throats. He didn't stop there though. Continuing, Neon never sets out to be anything other than Double Dragon. There's a laundry list of issues in Double Dragon that don't sit well decades later, and Neon retains all of them. Let's address a sad truth nobody wants to hear. The brawler genre is not very good anymore. The beat-em-up was built on the back of arcade game design. Difficulty didn't come by design, but by mechanics meant to scam kids. Double Dragon exploited our love of games, so we'd keep paying for it. Double Dragon Neon functions in a similar way. It's a brawler that's too focused on amusing you with 80s flair, and it comes at the expense of worthwhile gameplay. Jesus. IGN's review was a brutal takedown, suggesting that Double Dragon Neon clung too tightly to its nostalgic roots, resulting in an outdated and frustrating experience, with a journalist writing beat-em-ups off as out of date and with no place for them being welcome within modern gaming. With such a delusional take being put out there, and the game being given such a low review score, as you can imagine, many fans of beat-em-ups were flabbergasted by this ignorance, even if beat-em-ups weren't that mainstream at that time. The insanely negative hit piece had absolutely nothing positive to say about the game. The journalist didn't just condemn Neon, he took a bizarre swipe at the entire beat-em-up genre. Among the ludicrous criticism was the complaint about having to restart a level if you die, something fundamental to many games. The most distasteful part of the review was the journalist's audacity to present his opinions as facts, with statements like, "Let's address a sad truth nobody wants to hear. The brawler genre is not very good." Fast forward into the modern day, we can clearly see that this statement still doesn't hold any merit. Streets of Rage 4 and Shredder's Revenge, both following the traditional beat-em-up formula, became some of the most popular games in recent years, proving that the genre is far from dead. IGN's review of Double Dragon Neon comes across as not only overly harsh, but also embarrassingly out of touch, making their critique look more like a misguided rant than a fair assessment. Apart from an apparent innate hatred for arcade beat-em-ups, what strikes me as most odd is the journalist's bizarre belief that unless you're old enough to remember the 80s, the game's environment will be completely lost on you. It's baffling why anyone would think that unless you lived through a period, you wouldn't understand its stereotypical tropes. Stranger Things, for example, despite being designed and intended for an adult audience, would end up being extremely popular with Gen Z, and now an entire generation yearn for nostalgia from a time period they were yet to be born into. For example, I was born in the 80s, but that does not mean I'd not associate hippies, drugs and psychedelics with the 60s, and flares and disco with the 70s. I am pretty confident that few young people are stupid enough to not understand that neon lights and the music in the game were associated with the 80s. He seems to be massively underestimating young people's intelligence. Seeing practically no good in Double Dragon Neon whatsoever is astounding to me. The game not only brings classic beat-em-up action to the table, but also pairs it with a self-aware take on the 80s and includes one of the most entertaining villains I've ever seen in the video game period. It shines in so many departments, and while like most games it has its flaws, I struggle to see how anyone could honestly view it as complete garbage. Personally, I think this review from IGN is one of the worst takes I've ever read online regarding any video game. Obviously, the best way to form an opinion on a game is by playing it yourself, but it's also beneficial to read a variety of reviews to get a balanced perspective. That's why I like to discuss a range of opinions in my videos, ensuring you get a comprehensive view of a game's quality by considering different people's viewpoints. IGN's harsh review seems very unfair, especially given the game's many strengths and charm. It's a bit embarrassing to see such a one-sided critique from such a prominent site, as it underestimates the intelligence and tastes of modern gamers who can appreciate both nostalgia and innovation. Speaking of IGN, this certainly isn't the only time I've seen a review from one of their critics who seems to despise the entire genre of games they're covering. It's madness. I don't like Coronation Street or EastEnders for example, but you don't see me trying to make a living writing and talking about soap operas online. It's baffling why anyone would hire someone to review a game from a genre they have no appreciation nor respect for. The mentality behind this decision is beyond insanity to me. It's setting themselves up for failure and alienating a significant portion of their audience. If IGN and similar sites want to be taken seriously, they need to ensure their reviews are fair and well-rounded, reflecting the variety of perspectives, not just the opinion of someone who might not even like the genre in question. Luckily for you, Big Daddy Top Hat is here to cut through all of the nonsense and set the record straight. Regardless of what IGN said, I think this game is a gem, a fantastic and novel take on the classic franchise that truly deserves recognition for its quality. Neon is arguably one of the best entries in the Double Dragon series, and it's frustrating that some critics fail to see its brilliance. Don't let their narrow-minded views deter you from experiencing this vibrant, action-packed adventure for yourself. Trust me, Double Dragon Neon is a must-play for anyone who loves a good beat-em-up. Speaking of great beat-em-ups, don't forget you can use my affiliate link to get thousands of discounts and nab Double Dragon Gaiden for under $10 right now. Binge shop until your heart is content. Cheerio.
You've taken my pride, you scrapped my rocket dojo, laid waste to my laboratory, broke my televisions, and murdered countless Williamses. All I wanted was a date!